Hello and welcome to Corridor 8 podcast, the new series called Greg Chachoff, Alive in the MPO. We are honored to have a conversation with Mr. Greg Chachoff, who is a longtime member of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization and president of the MPO Freedom chapter in Columbus, Ohio. His family has been involved for dozens of years, for generations, in the organization and has a lot of personal contributions to the development of this legendary organization. The memories and personal impressions of Mr. Chachov are an exceptional source of information about the development and processes in this remarkable organization of the Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States and Canada, and their struggle for freedom, human rights, and Macedonia for all Macedonians, regardless of their nationality or religion. So, Mr. Chachov, it's our pleasure.
Thank you for having me. This is fantastic.
Alive in the MPO. It's really something very promising, and you have a lot of memories, impressions, and thoughts to share with us. I'm very sure that this conversation, this new series of conversations with you, will be very valuable for all our viewers, for the people who are interested in the history of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization. But first of all, Mr. Chachov, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I spent just about all of my life there until 1976. But in 1975, I met my wife, Janice, at an MPO function, actually a YMPO function in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And a year later, I moved up to Columbus and we were married, and I've been up here since. So I have two homes, Cincinnati and Columbus.
On the cover, we see part of your family. So could you tell us a bit about your family history and how the Chachovs became involved in the MPO?
Yeah, the picture on the right, the black and white photo, that's my grandfather and my grandmother, Christo Chachoff and Jordana. She went by Dana. Badoff Chachoff. Her name was changed from Badoff to Bedu before she came to the U.S. And in front there, the young boy standing is my uncle. Everybody referred to him as Mitch, but his name was Michael. And on the lap of my grandmother is my father, Philip, with that little devil grin on his face. And but yeah, those are my grandparents and my father and my uncle. The other picture, and of course, I'm the big guy with the smirk standing in the center, but in front is my mother, Nada Kolyanov Chachov. We lost her a year ago, Bog Prosta, but she was 92 years, lived a full life, loved and devoted to the MPO, which we'll probably talk a lot about. In the picture on the left is my youngest brother, David. David attends every convention, and he's there primarily. I love my brother. He's there to dance, and David is an exceptional dancer. And then on the other side is my brother Atanas. We call him Nasa. He has the same passion as the entire family. And, that love for the MPO. And, all of us were brought up in that environment. So, yeah, we've got the Chachoffs on the right. And I guess the Chachoffs on the left, huh?
And looking back, how did your parents influence your thinking about the world and life, as well about the MPO and Macedonia?
That's a very good question. And, hearing something like that, it really makes you think, because we don't realize it at the time as we're growing up. But when you've got as much, let's call it experience, as I have, you look back on all these little things that you picked up in your childhood that have had a lasting impression. So my mother and my father were extremely influential in the way that we evolved. And the one thing I saw in both of them is they were really fair and they cared about a lot of people. And little example, my mother grew up in an environment where her parents were bringing people from the village as they immigrated to the US. They were living in their house until they could get settled. She grew up in that kind of an environment. And when she was given the opportunity to do the same thing, she did. We had a cousin come and live with us from Istanbul until his parents could come over and they could get established. They ended up in San Francisco. But the reason I mention that is my mother did for my cousin the same thing that her parents did for all of those people who immigrated from their village. It She and my father were really, I think the best way you can describe it, if you've got a bucket of water in your hand and you throw it, that water is going to find its way down the path. That's what my parents did with us. They gave us the foundation, they gave us the support so that we could find ourselves. My brothers and I are similar, but we're so very different. We have a lot of the same passions, but we've also got things that we're not that we don't share that we have as individuals, and that's because of our parents. They allowed us to become ourselves. They encouraged us to be honest, to be open, to be inclusive. We grew up in a neighborhood. The street of my childhood, it was a very small street, had maybe 10 or 12 two-family homes where there were like two families in the house, and my grandparents lived on the first floor. We lived on the second floor, and but the street, the other families on the street, we were one of three Christian families on the street. It was a Jewish neighborhood, and my parents encouraged us to be friends, to learn about our friends. And I remember we're out playing, and all of a sudden my friends are gone. Well, they were all at Hebrew school. They were studying for their bar mitzvahs. I said to my parents at dinner that night, am I going to have a bar mitzvah? So my point is, from the very beginning, we were taught to be kind, to care about everybody, and to embrace everybody. And, circling back to the very beginning, that's a perfect example of your question. Just that little factor right there of our neighborhood and the street we lived on and my childhood friends, that opened my mind up from the very beginning to the fact that not everybody is like the Chachoffs. Everybody is different, and it's really important to embrace them. And so I think that's the most important thing that we got from our parents, was just that, that strong foundation to just be open and honest and, be good. And that's what I've tried to do. We'll see.
How did they introduce you to the MPO?
The MPO, going all as far back in my memory as I can, as a child, I can remember two things come to mind quickly is like we would go to, whenever we visited, it was always other Macedonians. And in the 50s and 60s and even into the early 70s, it was important to celebrate name days. And we would go to people's houses for name days. They taught us what to say, what to do when you go in, etc. The other event that we were always participating in were MPO meetings. There was a meeting, it seemed like once a month, at somebody's house. Quite a few of the people who were in the organization were related to us, either to the Chachoffs or the Kolyanovs, and but it was really important. And my brother and I, it there were, in some cases, there were other children our age, but most of them were older, maybe a few younger, but the kids all kind of gravitated together. The adults were in the living room or dining room having the meeting. Uh, you know, most of the time it was, depending upon who was speaking, it was either Punashi, it was either in our language or English or a combination of both. It In that situation, what did little kids care? We didn't care. But I can distinctly remember everybody participating. At the end, everybody would make donations, maybe $2, $5, $10. And those donations would be for three things: either for the local organization, which in Cincinnati was Bistrica, or the Macedonian Tribune, the Tribuna, or Kazuta, the cause. When you're 7, 8 years old, you don't know what the cause is. And when they would start talking about the cause, it was like I could see the passion. And occasionally, they would start telling stories. And there was one lady, I'll never forget this. Her name was, we called her Tetapasa. Her daughters were very close to our family. She and her husband were my grandparents, my Babilena de la Corla, the Kolyanovs, best friends. Tetapasa had a beautiful singing voice. And she would start singing these songs that I didn't know, in our language. And then the tears. I'd see her crying. I'd see other people getting all emotional. Well, she was singing patriotic songs. I didn't make the connection till much later. So as a child seeing this, I took away three things. The MPO meant a lot to all of these people, to the point where they felt the need to gather a lot. It was also something that was an important part of their past and the path that brought them to the US. The Macedonian cause, what they experienced when they were living back in their villages, what they were escaping. Now, when you're 5, 6 years old, you don't realize these things. But as I look back on it, I can see some of their faces, in my mind right now. And I know there was a lot of passion in what we were doing. And then, the third thing is the MPO was founded, to promote the Macedonian cause, as oh, we can call it the connection with Vemero, with IMRO and with the Macedonian movement. But what it did is it kept our people close together so that they could continue their culture. And, in addition to the meetings, 2, maybe 3 times a year, we would have, they called it a banquet, or in the summer, it would be a picnic. And the only difference between a banquet and a picnic and the meeting was, instead of meeting in somebody's living room, we were either in somebody's backyard or at the Chachoff's house in the basement, and there was food. Everybody would bring something to eat, and, pita or zelnik, I guess I should say. Everybody had their own specialty. This one lady would make cabbage rolls. Somebody else would make up bread, cheese, olives. There'd be music. And they did this several times a year. And then in the summertime, though, they always had the Linden picnic. And I did not know as a young child what Linden was, but they celebrated this event every year. And I never could understand why everyone was so upset, why everyone was crying, and why there was a bowl of chinitsa there with a candle in it.
Mm.
Well, they were commemorating the lives of these people
Yeah.
who were lost on Ilinden, and that idea of a free and independent Macedonia that disappeared after Ilinden. So as a child, you don't care, but those memories, they stick with you. And as you grow, you start connecting them and you make your own. So that, what I've just talked about to you in probably way too many words, is the foundation of my love for the MPO.
Mm.
That's where it all started, right there. So I hope that's a clear picture.
It is. Do you remember some phrases in Nashi Yazik? The oldest people, how did they speak?
I did not learn English. My parents taught me, naso yezik from birth. I didn't learn English till I went outside and started playing. So as I said, we lived with my baba. My baba came to this country in 1922, and she passed away in 1984 or 85, and she knew not much English at all. So if I wanted to speak with baba, I definitely had to speak Punashi. So jas može da zborovim Punashi, može da razbiram malko, ne može da razbiram čisto bulgarsko. Ako gledam tamo na Sofija, всичко ќе биде много тешко да знам што човек го рече, but мислам може да по ден може да разбирам. So yeah, I know a little bit.
It's
Enough
amazing.
I didn't make it pie, but they are čisto bulgarsko.
Yeah, actually, it's very hard for people who didn't visit any kind of formal Bulgarian school to speak the literary Bulgarian language. There are a lot of dialects, so but you preserved perfectly the spirit of the speech of this local dialect of your mom.
Yeah.
So it's a very impressive how through the generation is passed the love for MPO, the love for Macedonia, the love for the historical heritage of our people from previous generations, and how important was for the MPO and for you, the Chachoff's family, the struggle for freedom and for human rights, since you speak about Macedonian cause, especially for the Macedonian Bulgarians who left in Macedonia. How important was this?
As I grew, it became more and more important because I started learning the reality of what everything was about. And I hope I'm not jumping all over the place here, but I think what I'm about to talk about is central to where we are right now and how we got here. And here's what I mean by that. As I started asking questions, as I started hearing things growing up and asking questions, I started connecting all these dots. And here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I talked about how we would go to name days. And my mother had several cousins living in Cincinnati who were from the same village, of course, as her father. And I remember we went to this happened when I was in high school. And when we went to to somebody's name day, and everybody's gathered around, and actually I can tell you when it was. It was in the late 60s. It was after the junta, I guess, in Greece, when the generals or the colonels took over and they threw the king out. We're at this name day, and these people are arguing about supporting the king or supporting the colonels. And I'm sitting there listening to all this, and I'm like, wait a minute. We're not Greek. What do we care? They were incredibly passionate about it. So fast forward a couple of years, same group of people. It was in the summertime. We go to another name day. We're standing on the porch getting ready to ring the doorbell, and the windows were open, and we could hear inside, and they were all speaking Bulgarian. They were speaking Nasho Yezik. We ring the doorbell, we go in, and they looked at each other and they switched to Greek. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So, why did I even bring this up? In Cincinnati, in the environment we grew up, most of the people were pro Greek. They were Gurkomani.
Wow.
The people in the villages that my families came from, the ones that stayed behind, what happened to them? Their schools were closed. The churches were closed. They were had to go to Greek schools. They went to Greek churches. Their names were changed. My grandfather, Christo, had a brother in Kondorbi. Well, he was actually a half brother. They had different mothers. Anyway, his name was not Chachoff. It's Chachos.
Oh, yes.
My grandfather, Dedokorlo, last name Kolyanov, the family name was changed to Kolyanu. So they escaped it, and they were able to maintain the Macedonian Bulgarian roots and heritage. But those that stayed in the villages, they were impacted by the Hellenization that took place. It was almost a form of ethnic cleansing. So all of these people, when they came to Cincinnati, they were pro-Greek. They leaned to the Greek side of the whole question, and they viewed us not as Macedonians, as Bulgarians. Well, yes, ethnically, and this is a whole nother conversation and an eternal argument, but ethnically, yes, we are Bulgarian, but our origins are Bulgarian, but ethnically we're Macedonian. And there's a difference. It's the same logic behind the fact that I call myself a Macedonian, but I'm an American. And so you are who you were and where your roots were, but you're also who you became and where you were born. I hope that's a clear analogy. Anyway, so as I experienced all these things, I started asking questions. And I found out how and why these people left. How my Dedokorlo, when he married my Babalena, they were living in the village of Mokrani. The name got changed to Variku. Mokrani is Koster, but it's now Castoria.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Kumita. He's with my Baba in the village. His Kumiti brothers came to him and they're like, Nicola, you got to go. You have to leave right now. So he left the village, made his way to Cincinnati. Long story short, 18 years later, my Baba came to Cincinnati. My mother was born 1 year later, but when my Baba came, she brought with her 18-year-old daughter, a daughter my Dedo had never seen. So when I started processing all this information, I'm like, wait a minute. So then I'm thinking about the atrocities and the things that the families of my Jewish playmates, my friends, what they went through. And I'm like, the Macedonian people had a pretty tough time as well. I'm not equating the two, but the point is, because of what I heard about what my friends' families went through, and then what I saw what my family went through, I'm like, that's what America is. That's what makes America such a beautiful place, because people who needed a place to live the lives that they wanted had a place to do that. And we could do that here. But it's very important for us not to forget who we are. And that's why I became so involved with the MPO. As I started learning these things, I'm like, well, wait a minute. How can I have an impact on this? And so, from day one, and you hear these stories, that's just one story. My Dedo Corliss story is just one. But I ask myself, and I wish I would have thought of this before my Baba died. She died in 1968. But I would love to ask her, Baba, what was it like? What was it like raising a young girl on your own? Did you ever think you were going to see Dedo again? Just think about that. The separation they went through, and that's just two people, one family. My Baba Lena, my Baba Donna Chachova, who we lived with. She came to Cincinnati with her sister. Another sister went to Australia. Another sister went to Gary, Indiana. I think eventually her mother and father made their way to Cincinnati. But what I'm about to tell you is probably one of the most important pieces of family history I ever heard. It was in the early 70s. All of a sudden, I go to see my Baba and Dedo. There's a picture there I had never seen. Turns out it was a picture of my Baba and her sisters. There were 5 people in the picture. Okay. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I thought there were just 4 of you. And then my Baba got emotional. And so my Dedo told me the story that I had never known. Well, there was a 5th sister. When she was 14 or 15 years old, she refused to speak Greek. Some Grekomani in the village were telling her she had to speak Greek. It's important that they all speak Greek, this, that, and the other. She refused, Nesem Gurk, whatever the case is. And so they beat her, and they beat her, and they beat her, and she was brutalized for many hours, and she died. That was my Baba's sister, Sophie, who I didn't even know existed. She was beat to death because she wasn't speaking Greek. So at that moment, that's when I made the decision that I had to honor her memory and the others like her. She was just one person. But that family, for them to be able to, for those sisters to be able to survive that, to come to this country, to continue to have their own children, to raise those children, to have grandchildren, and for the family to continue, I felt that's the least I could do, is to keep that memory alive, to keep that passion alive. Because think about that. That girl gave her life. She gave her life. And so, I made a conscious decision in my mind at that time to do everything I could to promote the Macedonian cause, the Macedonian history and culture, and to make sure my children and as many people as I could influence knew about it. And then I also said I was going to name, if I had a daughter, her name was going to be Sophie. Well, my oldest daughter, Alexandra, we call her Sana. My wife did not like the name Sophie. So her middle name is Sophia, Alexandra Sophia. But Sana, I know you're going to watch this, and I know you know this story, but that's why you have that middle name. Anyway, at that moment, I was like, what can I do about that? So, I'm like, okay, I can become a historian. I can do research about Macedonian immigration, about our culture, about our people. Maybe someday I'll become a professor. Maybe I'll write a book, but I want to be able to get the facts. Well, that process started, and then it stopped when I developed a love for photography, and I happened to be incredibly good at it. So I was able to make a career of it, and the history got put aside. But when I met Professor Dienef a couple of years ago, he got me back into the thought of completing my degree and this project. And Georgi, that's how you and I are together here today, because of what started when I found out about my Baba's sister Sophia, and how I decided I am going to do everything I can to just at least keep these memories and these stories and our history alive. So that's how we're here today.
It's really a very, very personal thing to get involved in such an organization, in such a cause. And all the time while I was listening to you, I made my personal reflections to my family roots, to my family history. I'm a Thracian. I come from Thrace. This is the territory east of Macedonia, another territory that was under the Ottoman yoke at the time. So before VMRO, it was VMORO. There was one letter O. It was for Odrinsko, the region of my family roots. So Thracian Bulgarians had very similar experiences. My
Awesome.
my grandparents grew up as orphans because of the massacres. Uh, People were sent to the Greek islands in the Aegean Sea because they were part of the revolutionary organization. And the government of, I think it was Venizelos, not sure, they sent them there to Crete, to other islands on the Aegean Sea, and many people died there. So there are a lot of people who cried while they were sharing their personal stories. And it's, I think, many choices in my life. I did it because of my roots and how I reflect what I saw from my parents, my grandparents, all the stories. Even today, I still make some research on the topic of Thracian Bulgarians.
I mean, it's just so many people. It's so easy to like lock that in a closet and forget about it. But and I guess it's easier that way. It's less painful. But for me, I think it's important to everybody know as much as they can about who they are and where they came from. And so we're kindred spirits, Georgi. You feel the same way I do. That's why you're doing this, right?
Right.
You're
Right.
honoring your roots. You're honoring, the
Yeah.
people that made you. And that's a good thing. That's
And
a
I
good
still
thing.
know people who go to Greece, to northern Greece, the part of Thrace which belongs to Greece now. So it's just like Macedonia is divided between was divided between three countries. It's the same with Thrace now. It's between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. And there are people from my town who go south to the Greece part of Thrace to find the old village, to find the graveyards,
Yeah.
to take uh, ground and to bring
Wow.
it back to Bulgaria, to the grace of their parents. So to have
That's
something called,
fantastic.
yeah, they still do it.
I hope to make that pilgrimage someday. Um,
Mm.
I got close in 1972. Pardon me. Yeah, the summer of 72. That cousin that I mentioned that was living with us, I went back to Istanbul with him for
Mhm.
about a month. And, it wasn't feasible to try to go to the villages. And I was like, I'll do it next time I come over. Or should check them. I'm still waiting. I still haven't gone back. But I did get to spend one night in Athens because of a problem with the flights. And I just remember how angry I felt as I was leaving, as I was leaving the airport, or I should say, as I was entering the country, because when the passport control officer took my passport and he looked at it and he goes, Chachoff. Then he reaches underneath his counter and he pulls up a box, a big box, and he opens it up and he starts going through these cards. And then he pulls one out and he goes like that. He goes, Vulgaros.
Yeah.
He stamped my passport and I was in. And I was like, what the hell? I'm like, it's 1972. What are we doing here? But, I was still able to feel that he made a connection because of my name. and he looked through his files, probably saw my family, that we were involved in the MPO. And at the time, I was very angry. But looking back on it, I'm like, that's a perfect example of everything I've been telling you. It is how they took our identity and just it's been diluted now. And to the point where, I don't even know if there's people speaking our language in the villages. Maybe there's a few, but by now, it's probably all gone. So if I can keep some of that going, that's a good thing. And but it, yeah. Anyway, I hope to go back to, the 4 villages where my grandparents came from. There's Condorbi, Mokreni. My Babalena was from Polior, and then my Babadana was from Kosinets. Kosinets was a very big village that was completely annihilated by, I think, the end of the late 30s, early 40s. I don't know. But a lot of problems there. Ilinden, the Balkan Wars, World War I and II. I don't know if by World War II it was probably gone, wasn't it? I would think. But yeah, so those 3 are still standing. And I hope someday to set foot in those places. We'll see. We'll see.
I wish you to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had in my mind to ask you about events or people who shaped your growth and your ideas as an MPO member. And actually, you already shared one of these events to learn about the history of your grandmother's sister, Sophia. Are there other events, other people, meetings that had such important, I would say, crucial impact on your
Absolutely.
development?
Absolutely.
Please tell us about this.
Yeah. Going back to something we talked about earlier, in our community in Cincinnati, there was not a very large group of Macedonians like the Chachoffs. And here's let me kind of explain that a little bit here. I already mentioned a lot of them were Gorkomani, so they gravitated towards the Greek church. And oh goodness, I just thought of something. So a lot of them went to the Greek church. In fact, we would go to the Greek church because there was no Macedonian church. There was a Macedonian Bulgarian church, but it didn't have a priest, and they only had church maybe, once every 2 or 3 months. And the people that started the church were not MPO. So we didn't really embrace, that option. We were going to a Russian church for a while. In fact, my brother Nasa and I were altar boys at the Russian church, but they couldn't keep a priest, so we ended up at the Greek church. Anyway, and so I became friends with a lot of Greeks, and the whole Macedonian issue never really came up. And I look back on it, I thought it was really odd, but they didn't look at me as a Macedonian. I was just somebody who they went to church with. Anyway, there was I'm sorry, this is so random, but you asked about important events. When I was 12 years old, maybe it was 10. Anyway, my grandfather died in 1965, my dedo Cordo. This would have been about 1963, so I might have been 10 or 11 years old. There was a wedding. A Macedonian girl was getting married, a good friend of our family's, and a big wedding, and it was going to be at the Greek church. Well, my dedo Cordo, he didn't stop my mom or my grandmother when my mother was younger from going to church at the Greek church, because that was the only Orthodox church in Cincinnati at the time. He wouldn't go, though. He didn't want to hear anybody speaking Greek. He didn't want to hear Greek music. And so there's this wedding. So my grandfather was not going to go in the church. No way. So my parents couldn't go to the wedding because my father was working. Long story short, they sent me to sit with my dedo in the car so he wouldn't be by himself and so he wouldn't have to go in the church. So we're sitting there. After about 15, 20 minutes, he looks at me and he goes, he goes, I got to go to the bathroom. I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do? And he goes, I'll be all right. A few minutes go by. I could tell he was really uncomfortable. And he saw a side door and he goes, all this, I'm going to see if I can say it how he said it. Влези си натре тамо на то врата и да видиш ви има нужно тамо. Go inside that door, see if you can find a bathroom. So I did that. That's what he told me to do. And luckily there was one just a few steps just inside the doorway. He snuck in there, took care of business, came out. He was happy. And he goes, Ne da kažeš da nikoj. I'm like, Dedo, I'm not going to tell anybody. And I wouldn't even be telling you right now if he didn't. As soon as my Baba and Teta got back in the car, he immediately told them everything. And he told them how he swore me to secrecy. And of course, my Baba yelled at him for that, and everybody had a good laugh. But 11 years old, your grandfather doesn't want to go to the bathroom in a Greek church. That's a strong message right there. That was a very strong message. And that was an important moment, because when you take all of these little events and you attach them together, and then when I found out that big piece of information about my Baba's sister, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. So we started going to conventions. My first convention, I was 5 years old. I barely remember it. It was 1957. It was in Cincinnati. I remember two things about it. My brother Nasa was really little. He was maybe 2. And, so my mother was taking care of him. We're at this huge event in a room, and I never saw so many people in one place in my life. That's it. That's all I remember. Of course, there was music. Everybody's dancing. Everybody's having a great time. The next convention I went to was 1964. And this is my first real convention. It was in Detroit. And there's so many things that happened there. But the most important thing for me was I got to meet other people my age who, there were a couple from Fort Wayne, and there was one girl from Toronto. And they had Macedonian churches in their city. They had huge MPOs. They would have dances. Their friends were just like they were. I had never associated with kids like that to the level that their involvement with MPO and going to conventions was. So that was an eye-opener. And I became very jealous that we didn't have that in Cincinnati, that we had just slivers of that. At that same convention, the Beatles were in Detroit that weekend. They were staying at the same hotel. Never got to see them, but the rumors were running rampant, and that was exciting to a 12-year-old. And then on, I think it was either Sunday or Monday, President Johnson was running for re-election. He came to Detroit to make a speech. He came to the convention. He spoke to the convention. He and his wife, they gave Lady Bird a big bouquet of roses, and we're all lining this corridor as they came out. And here I am, 12 years old. I'm meeting people like me that I'd never met before. I'm seeing this massive dance on Saturday night, huge banquet and dance on Sunday, another dance on Monday. The music, just the volumes of people. And to top it all off, we got the Beatles supposedly staying at the same hotel. And we got the president of the United States and his wife where I could reach out and touch them. In fact, when Mrs. Johnson walked past me, the flowers the MPO gave her went across my face. Can you imagine this? 12 years old? Well, of course, I loved conventions. I was like, I couldn't wait to go again. Next convention was 1969 in Cincinnati. That was just fantastic. I got to meet more people. It, I got to see what was happening in the MPO. I didn't really know what MPO was about, what the meetings were, but I knew it was important to my father. He was delegate. He was constantly, you know, talking to somebody. And, you know, I guess there were things going on. I didn't know what they were. I didn't care. I was 16, right? I'm going to have a good time. And then a couple of years later, we're back in Cincinnati. It's 1972. And I got to meet more and more people. I met more people from Fort Wayne, people from Akron, Cleveland, Tasha Olushev. That's when I met him. Fantastic person. Bog do prosti, I miss Tasha. Tasha knew so much about the MPO and about Macedonia. And I got to meet Larry Koroloff, Fred Menkoff from Toronto, and all their friends. Fred was a fantastic president of the MPO recently. We're still friends to this day. We talk multiple times during the week. Larry Koroloff was one of my earliest best friends. I have never known a human being that knows more about our people, our history, our culture than Larry. I learned so much from him. So your question was, what did the MPO have on me? The influence the MPO conventions had on me. That's what it had on me. And interacting with all these people I met, you know, with Tasha, with Fred, with Larry. Well, it started like I'm thinking about all of these events that led up to that moment in my life and some of these anecdotes and stories I've told you. Well, okay, it was my turn now. And that's when I got involved in college with my independent study project, learning about our history and our people. But that's when I would go to meetings and I would start paying attention. And, you know, it was difficult because most of it was not in a language I could understand. Yes, they were speaking Bulgarian, but it was not the dialect I learned. There was a lot of English, but not enough English. But that started the path. And I've got to just stop right there. And Janice, this part's for you. Because of the friends I met, it 2 years later at a convention in Detroit, I'm talking with Larry and Fred and some other people from Toronto. Well, they asked me if I wanted to be on the YMPO coordinating committee. They wanted me to be English page editor. I was overwhelmed. I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I was put on the coordinating committee and I was English page editor. I'm really excited. And the following May, every year the YMPO had a tournament. A lot of times they would have bowling and basketball. This particular year, all they had was a basketball tournament. There were several teams. I think Detroit, Toronto, Fort Wayne, Akron might have had teams. Anyway, I went with my cousin from Cincinnati because two reasons. I was on the Central Committee and I was hoping to find the future Mrs. Chachoff.
Mm.
And it was in Fort Wayne. And, you know, by the grace of God, I met Janice. And, you know, of course, everything changed then. You know, we were married a year and a half later. But again, that was all through the MPO. You know, so many things in my life have been influenced by the MPO. That's why it's so dear to me. And I think I answered your question. I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, you did. It's perfect answer actually. And it's really very interesting for me how a young child grows up in a certain environment, and with every new age stage sees more, finds more, connects
That's
the
right.
dots. Yeah, SOC. So, from your perspective today, I would ask you, like a historian, since this is what you are. From your perspective, what characteristics and qualities of the MPO make it such a unique organization, such a special organization, not just perfect, especially for you on a personal level, but also on a social level?
Wow, that's a really good question. It you know, first and foremost, the MPO, by having the convention, allows us once every year, and for someone like myself who didn't live in, Toronto, Fort Wayne, Akron, in Cleveland, where they had the large organizations and they all gathered socially as well as for the MPO. It gave us a chance to interact with people from all over the US and Canada, to experience our culture and the events that took place that got us to where we are now. Plus, there's no better food than Macedonian food. There's no better dancing than Macedonian dancing. And the music, my goodness, it's the best. So there we are for a weekend, once every year, experiencing all of that. And then there's just the relationships that you build. You know, I met my wife. I met the best friends that I've ever had in my life. I experienced things with my grandparents, my parents, my brothers, now my children and my grandchildren at conventions. It So the MPO almost guarantees that that's going to continue, as long as we're gathering with the conventions. But what's important for me, and what I'm trying to make sure that I pass on to everybody I come in contact with, that it didn't start with an order, that it didn't start with a Zelnik contest or a song fest, that it all started with a group of individuals who basically got kicked out of Greece or Serbia/Yugoslavia and came to the US or Canada to have a better life for themselves and for their families, but they loved what the idea of a free and independent Macedonia represented, that they started this organization so they could maintain that connection, with their leaders, with those that, evolved and descended from the group that gave us Ilinden and the struggle that began. They wanted to continue that, and they wanted to support that cause because it was their dream that someday, as Ivan Mihailov said, that we would have a Macedonia, a Switzerland of the Balkans, where where everybody's welcome. Just it just kind of like the US, kind of like Switzerland, where it's okay if you speak French or Italian or German or the Swiss dialect. Well, the same thing could apply in Macedonia. And that was idealistic, but it kind of says who we are. Well, what's happened here in the US and Canada is you've got those who have completely assimilated into American/Canadian society, and they really don't care about it. They left the culture, the the Orthodox religion, maybe. They left all the ethnic influences they grew up with. Then you've got those who obviously are going to lean towards the whole idea of established by Greece.
Mm.
Those who, we can call them Sodomani, or we can call them Tito's. We can call them whatever we want. but they don't like the MPO. Either faction doesn't like the MPO. So you've got these four. It's cut up in four different types of people, and those of us that are still in the MPO, it takes hard work. You've really gotta stick with it, because it's much easier to say, I'm an American now, forget that. Or, no, you know what? The Greeks say we're Greeks, we're Chachos, not Chachos. I'm a Greek. Or, like my wife's family, they're from, well, what was at the time the Yugoslav part, but they had, my father-in-law's last name Georgiev, I believe it got evolved into Georgievsky, right? Same
Yeah.
thing the Greeks did. Maybe not as much, maybe not to the degree the Greece did it, but it still created division. So, the MPO, though, the MPO is as close as I'm going to get, and my children are going to get, to experience what it was like when their babas and dedos came to this country, and what they left behind, and what they were trying so hard to preserve. So,
Very well said. And you make a very big point here. This is something that is important for me and for the discussion. The discussion that we have actually made a cover with this. I think it's very important to discuss the struggle of MPO for human rights in the region of Macedonia after World War II. You mentioned Greece, you mentioned Serbia/Yugoslavia, and you're a witness in this process. And it's really not just the social thing, the dances and the food. It's about the cause, causata. And also it's important probably how to transmit the cause through the generations. What is important, why it is important on an individual or family, but also on a social level, to know about the suffering of the past generations, how we can use this knowledge for what purpose today and now. It's because it's actually everlasting thing. It's
right.
the values of freedom, of human right, inclusivity, equal rights
Right.
for all. This is actually the foundation of the American and Canadian societies. This is how societies should live. This is how everywhere we could try to do it. So one organization was created for a certain purpose. And even if the time changed and new geopolitical or social conditions exist today, the purpose could still exist in a new way today. But it is important to know all this development of the process from the beginning. So this is why I actually did this slide. And I would like to ask you, when we speak about the human rights as the foundation, human rights, freedom for all, Macedonia is a Switzerland of the Balkans, etc. All this very inclusive, very democratic approach for the solution of the so-called Macedonian question. What I would like to ask you, what do you think were MPO's major accomplishments in the area of human rights protection during the Cold War?
It as I look back on things, I think the most important thing that the MPO did was it stayed the course. It held to the founding ideas. When those individuals gathered in 1922 in Fort Wayne and started the MPO, of which my mother's father, De La Corla, was one of them. They did so because they were continuing the struggle here in the U.S. and to provide support. They stayed the course and they maintained their ideals. So as everybody who knows, the events of World War II led to a different Yugoslavia than we had before World War II. Tito, his influence, his creating of the various states and whatever he called Macedonia. I don't even remember what it was officially referred to. However, in order to, and this is my opinion, I will really want to strive that. I don't claim to be a scholar in this area at all, but this is my opinion and observation. But I think what he was trying to do was very similar to what was happening in the Greek part of Macedonia in the early part of the century, which was they wanted to change the narrative. He was changing the narrative. He created this language. He created this history, this culture, these connections to the past that were, maybe they had a sliver of facts, sliver of truth. Maybe they were based upon, something that was real, but the narrative was changed in a way to support what he was trying to accomplish, which worked because as people from that part of Macedonia when they started coming to America, they didn't view the MPO as being anything Macedonian at all. And I'm so, and a perfect example of that, a personal example of that is my two of my daughters, Tsana and then the youngest daughter, Ariana, are both married and they've both got children. And their weddings took place in the Greek church here in Columbus. The children's baptisms were in the Greek church here in Columbus. Why? Because the Chachoff family and my wife's family before we became Greg and Janice, the Georgieffs, felt more comfortable at the Greek church than at the Macedonian church. Because at the Macedonian church, they viewed us as outsiders. They viewed us as Bulgarians, not Macedonians. At the Greek church, we've been embraced as Macedonians. Pretty ironic when you come to think about it. But the point is, the MPO could have very easily said, Tito, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then changed everything. Or they could have embraced the whole American aspect of it. But no, they didn't. They maintained a connection to the original ideas. I was very lucky in mid 60s. I don't know what the official title was, but Ivan Mihailov's, call him a right-hand man, because I really don't know what the official title was, but Arseny Avramov, who worked with Ivan Mihailov, came to Cincinnati. Why he was in Cincinnati, I don't even know. But he stayed at our house, and I got to meet this guy, and he was telling me about Rome and his travels, and he left, and okay, Mom, Dad, who is Arseny Avramov? And then they started telling me some of the things that he did. Well, he was able to help people escape, Yugoslavia, which was communist at the time, Bulgaria, which was communist at the time, people from the Macedonian portion of Greece. He was able to help them escape. Aid was funneled to various people through Arseny Avramov. Arseny Avramov got his direction from Ivan Mihailov, and Ivan Mihailov got his support from the MPO. So to circle very, very briefly back to your original question, the MPO willing to maintain the course, to maintain its connections to Ivan Mihailov, and through Ivan Mihailov, Arseny Avramov and others, kept the ideal going, kept the whole concept, that we all were hoping for they kept it alive and they kept it going. And they resisted any, any temptation to take the easier path, which would have been to embrace one of the other factions. The MPO now, it's a direct descendant of what those people started in 1922, and it's not the same because times have changed, but it's incredibly similar. It's very, very similar, and it would have been a lot easier to avoid that and to just like, this is the U.S., this is Canada, we've got to do things differently. Not everything, and I think that's where the MPO did a really good job. And that's how they avoided that temptation to change the path. And to just kind of put a finishing touch on this, I can remember in my last year at the University of Cincinnati, I was taking a graduate level course because, I'd heard about this professor. His name was Peter Topping. He was Greek, and he was the only professor, though, at UC that was teaching classes on the Balkans. And so I took his class. There were maybe 8 people in the class. I was the only undergrad in the class, but I wanted to take it. So, it was good. I'm glad I did. I got a different perspective on a lot of things. I learned a lot, but it didn't take very long for him to realize what my state of mind was. So he asked to meet with me this one day, and we talked, and I told him exactly why I evolved into who I was, what I thought about Macedonia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. We talked about the MPO. Anyway, so the next class that we had, he's doing his lecture, and he just stopped and he goes, now I'm going to ask Mr. Chachoff to tell us about the Macedonian question and its relevance to today's society, and if he ever thinks there's going to be a free and independent Macedonia. I was caught totally off guard, and I was kind of angry at first, but then I thought about it, and I'm telling you this because I think this is going to kind of answer your question, maybe at least to my state of mind. And I said, realistically, Greece is never going to give up Macedonia. Bulgaria is never going to give up Macedonia. Bulgaria is never going to get all of Macedonia, like the Treaty of San Stefano. It's going to stay the way it is, with the exception of what's probably going to happen in Yugoslavia. I said, Tito is not going to live forever. When Tito leaves this earth, Yugoslavia will fall apart. I said, my little life experience, my limited knowledge, but my common sense tells me Croatia is going to be the first one to go. And they're going to break away and they're going to form their own country. And the others are going to gradually do the same thing, including Macedonia. I said, that will be the closest we come to a free and independent Macedonia. And I guess I got that right. I don't know. Lucky guess. But the MPO, through all of this, has stayed to that original idea. And, we've put ourselves in a position now where we have a friend in Bulgaria. Once communism fell, MPO's ties and consistency allowed us to be friends with Bulgaria. And there's also the opportunity to exist for the MPO and the Republic to be friends. A lot better now than anything that was taking place when it was Tito's Yugoslavia.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting that you mentioned the Yugoslavian change of narrative, and that you stayed on your foundation positions and didn't change anything as an organization at the time. Looking back in the years of the Cold War, what was the reason for MPO to have such a sharp rhetoric against the ruling elite of Yugoslavia that changed the narrative?
I think it was a lot of things, but you can use the example, and I hope I pronounce this right, and I don't know the story as well as I should, but the Strumishkata Petorka. What happened to those 5 people? That
They were
is,
all killed.
yeah, that is no different than what happened to the families and the individuals that were fleeing, you know, the Macedonian region in the early 20th century. They lost their lives because who they were was important to them. The MPO recognized that. You go to the convention now, you're going to see that picture of those 5 students. The organization, the MPO organization in New Jersey, it's named after them.
Yeah.
It, you know, that was what happened to those students was a direct result of what was taking place in Tito's Yugoslavia. They lost their lives because they weren't conforming. I hope I'm not generalizing the situation here and with my limited knowledge of it, but that's what my takeaway was as I learned about this. The MPO realized this, and they realized that those students, at least I'm assuming they did because of the way that we've honored them, they were living the MPO's ideal. They were looking at our Macedonian existence the same way we do, and just from a different place, just from a different time. And then, in addition to that, as people immigrated to this country, we could see those that were pro-Yugoslav, and every once in a while, there was somebody who wasn't. And we would hear things, and you would learn things about, what it's like there and just the oppression. It wasn't as overt as the oppression during the reign of Karavangelis and the Hellenization that took place in the Greek part of Macedonia, but it was an influence nevertheless, and it was an effect that's still being felt now. So when you look at the two narratives, the MPO's narrative is exactly the way it was when all of this started, let's say in 1903. But the narrative that the people in the Republic, some of the people in the Republic, and their predecessors have is a result of what was created after World War II.
As far as I remember, one of the Strumishka Petorka students was called Stevo Topchev. He was the younger brother of Luben Topchev, a prominent MPO member who passed probably 2 years ago. So Luben Topchev was even personally involved in this situation. He ran from Yugoslavia a year ago, before the Strumica 5 were killed, and then his younger brother was killed. So it's also a personal thing, and as you already mentioned, our social engagements are very often connected to our family stories. And Luben Topchev is an example of this. He was also very, very devoted member of the organization, as far as I know, in the past. Speaking about the different narrative in Yugoslavia during the Tito period, I think a lot of troubles that we have today actually are based in this time. The change of narrative actually was based on falsifications of original documents. This is how it was built. And today it is called cultural appropriation. When the heritage of a certain group of people is taken and used by all the others without recognizing the origins of this heritage. So this is something that happened actually in Yugoslavia, like all revolutionaries who declared to be Macedonian Bulgarians. The word Bulgarians was just deleted from the records. And if we look at the Bulgarian communist time position, it was just the opposite extreme. If in Belgrade and Skopje they said, no, we are different nationality for thousands of years, like King Samuel, etc., etc., Kliment Ohridski. In Bulgaria, the position was, no, you are still Bulgarians. You were and you are still Bulgarians. So there were two extremes. And the only way actually to compromise these two extremes, it seems that was the idea of Macedonia as a Switzerland of the Balkans, where all people could get together, being together, no matter of their identity, establishing peace. It was actually an idea based on the perception of peace on the Balkans after all the wars. So it was also a reconciliation idea,
Right. Right.
even for the Greeks, even for the Turks, for everybody, for the Serbs, for the Bulgarians, all could be together in Macedonia
Right.
and be Macedonians in a equal base.
Right.
So as far as I see, actually, we couldn't discuss this today. We couldn't discuss the topic of why all people living in Macedonia or originating from Macedonia could be equally Macedonians if it wasn't MPO, if it wasn't
That's
Ivan Mikhailov,
That's right.
if it wasn't your long struggle for public advocacy of this ideal. So this is really an accomplishment. To make possible for the President of the United States to come in the convention, that means a lot of work.
Think about it. That is just, it just blows my mind right now. That really happened. That I saw that. It's amazing. Amazing.
And actually, after the discussion in the university and the prognosis that Yugoslavia will fall apart, it really happened.
Right.
In the early 90s. And in this very different situation on the Balkans, including the so-called Macedonian question, what are the major accomplishments of the MPO in this period, let's say in the last 35 years?
And wow. You know, the again, everything I'm gonna relate here or discuss are my observations and my impressions. You know, I don't claim to be the know all be all. I don't know everything. I don't know what was driving events, but I know what I saw. And from some of the things that we see, you know, we draw conclusions. And the MPO in the 70s, when I really first started getting involved, I became directly involved. I think it was 1977 when the convention was in Toronto. That's the first time I went as a delegate. Talk about a fish feeling like a fish out of water. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was very lucky, though. I sat next to Dita Atsif, who was Petar Atsif's wife, and on one side, and then I forget who was on the other side, but they were able to translate for me because about 90% of what was taking place was not in English, and they were able to just kind of explain the process to me. I learned a lot. Anyway, it What started happening in the late 60s, early 70s was there were some things that were taking place that, looking back on it, I think that they were driven by influences from Yugoslavia. It and I think there was disruption that was starting to take place within MPO, and there was division, and then there was like the group that had been dominating the organization's leadership for the last few years. Petaracев had been president. Chris Anastasov had been vice president. My father was on the Central Committee at the time. They were losing favor, and things were shifting in a direction where it really led to a lot of arguing, and convention meetings became very passionate, and there was a group that was supporting the leadership, and there was a group that was not supporting the leadership. And then in the mid 70s, the leadership changed. Petaracев was no longer president. Dr. Isakov became president. And I could see, without knowing what the facts were, but I could see more and more influence coming from outside the MPO. There was, more indirect involvement from Ivan Mikhailov, and it was kind of a mixed message. And there was disruption among the people as to what direction the MPO was going to go. So this went on for several years, and then it was really kind of difficult to see where the MPO was going. And we missed a convention that was in Toronto. I forget the year. I should know the year, but this was a very pivotal convention because Petaracев died at the convention, and everybody was devastated. Shortly after, he became president of the MPO, and he seemed to right the ship, so to speak. All of the division that had taken place in the 70s and early 80s, all of a sudden, I don't want to say it evaporated, but MPO became more cohesive. There was less disruption, and the goal was to move forward and to preserve the organization. And Ivan Labamov did a very good job of this. In 1987, I became a member of the Central Committee for the first time. And so I got to have that peek, that look behind the curtain, and see how the MPO, operated and what we were about. And I really made a lot of really good connections. And I got to meet Borislav Ivanov, and, I got to know Ivan Labamov really well. And, I got to know Doriatsev really well. She was Petr's daughter and editor of the Tribune at the time. And so I started learning more and more. Ivan Labamov's brother, George Labamov, was treasurer of the organization then. I got to meet and understand and know him. And so these were the people, and I was part of that group, although not as direct, that were going to take MPO forward. And they did a great job. It was really nice to be a part of that. I'm going to circle back, though, to the period of the 70s, because by the time I was on the Central Committee and Ivan Labamov had taken control and the leadership of MPO. In that period in between, the size of the MPO just was shrinking. And I would see every year we'd go to conventions and I'd see people that I'd seen, but all of a sudden I started stop seeing people and fewer and things it got smaller and smaller. And instead of having meetings over 3 days, there were meetings over 2 days. And then it became just one day. And then it became just a couple hours on Saturday. MPO was getting smaller and smaller. There were less people. Fortunately, everything was in English. Everybody could understand things. People were able to participate more. Why am I mentioning all this? Had the leadership of the MPO in the 60s and the 70s taken a look forward, and Petaracев was one of my heroes growing up. Ivan Mikhailov was obviously one of my heroes. I already talked about Arsen Avramov. My mother talked about Chris Nizamov, who was editor of the Tribuna for many years, gave his life to the MPO, got to know Chris Nizamov. All of these people, these were my heroes. These were the leaders of the MPO. But they didn't do enough, looking back on things, to take MPO forward. Why? Why am I saying that? The insistence to keep the meetings in Bulgarian and not English. The resistance of, I can remember a convention. It was in Cleveland. I was the delegate. It was early 80s. On Sunday afternoon, they used to do two things at the meeting. They would read the annual report of the Central Committee, and they would read a letter from Ivan Mikhailov. A letter from Ivan Mikhailov would take about an hour and a half to read. It was all in Bulgarian. After they read it at this particular convention, I suggested, no, it wasn't me, somebody else. I think it was someone from Toronto suggested that for the next convention and going forward, we plan to read this letter in English so that more people can understand it. I seconded that motion. Somebody stood up and said, "Who's going to translate this? Let the young person who seconded this motion do the translating." I was like, "What?" But this kind of mentality, this pushback to translate a letter from our leader, that type of thinking was holding the MPO back. And because the MPO was unwilling to move forward, to embrace people as they evolved, as they grew, as they left their families and started their own families, and particularly the language barrier, and the importance of, maintaining that, or I should say, taking steps to educate to everyone, to our culture and to our foundation. It left a huge gap. So many people left the MPO. Some have trickled back, but now, our numbers are not nearly what they could be and what they were like. I can still remember that we talked about it when I was 5 years old, that first convention where I just never saw so many people in one place in my life. So, had the leadership at that time had the foresight, and they were all very smart people, they were very intelligent men. Had they done the things that they could have done, it probably could have retained a lot of the descendants, the children's and grandchildren of some of those people who were driving the MPO. A lot of them are gone now. They don't come to conventions, and they don't participate in the MPO and the organization, and it's too bad. But what we're trying to do now is not go further back, maintain and take baby steps forward. We've got new members. We've got an organization in Las Vegas now. We've got an organization in Indianapolis now. The Chicago organization is now our largest organization. So the MPO is moving forward. And this move, and this is really important, the people that are coming to the MPO now are unlike the people who founded the organization, but they're like those people. In other words, they're not from the same region. They didn't suffer the same sufferings, but they have the same passion, and their families have the same strength and love and foundation that the founders' families had. So we're kindred spirits. And, the fact that we're embracing them and that they're participating in the MPO is a good thing. And that's what's going to help keep it going. And hopefully we can reach out to the descendants of my generation. I look around and I think of those people I was friends with in the in the late 60s and early 70s that I met through the MPO. There's not many of their family members, their children, their grandchildren who are coming to conventions. And if we can get some of them to come back, that would be fantastic. But the MPO is still here. That's the good news. The MPO is still here.
You managed to do this. You preserve the organization. MPO exists. It's really important. And it's a very, very important thing that you said about the generational change. You're very right. The new generations who were born and grew up in the United States and Canada, they hardly could speak Bulgarian or the old local Macedonian dialect from Kostur, from Lerin, from Bitola, no matter where, or from other parts of Macedonia, for many reasons. People accommodate to the accepting environment, which is English speaking. They adopt the dominating culture. Plus, it's not easy to support Sunday schools, organizing teaching in Bulgarian. So there is a big difference between the founding fathers of MPO and their children and the next generations, let's say 50 years later. I agree with you. And this generational change could be, what is the word? Could be managed in a better way.
I think so.
But probably, when I think now about this, probably for the leadership at the time, it was very important to insist on the language used, Bulgarian and not English, because it was identity.
That's right.
I see. Yes. So maybe there was a middle way, middle road.
Right. And it's easy. There's an American expression, everybody's a good quarterback on Monday. The game was Sunday. It's easy for me sitting here in 2025 and criticizing, the leadership of MPO. It's easy for me to do that. But I think they were smart enough. I think they were intelligent enough where they should have been able to see this. And be that as it may. We are here now. And let's deal with what we've got. And you know what? I have this discussion with my friend Fred Mianchev. He was a very good president. And he and I talk about, he's very upset that we don't have the numbers that we could have. And I'm like, Fred, you're right. It is too bad. We could have so many people, but let's be thankful for what we do have. And the fact that we have been able to keep this alive and we can keep it going. And that's got to be our guide. That has to be what leads us, is that hope that we're going to keep it going.
Could you tell me something more about uh, what you mentioned earlier? You had the feeling that there is kind of Yugoslavian influence on the processes in the MPO, and also you felt that how did it happen actually? How did Yugoslavia could interfere in the deeds of the MPO?
Wow, that's a tough one because I don't have any direct eyewitness things that I saw. It's just a matter of listening, observing,
Okay.
reflecting. And I think there was a faction within the MPO that I don't know how they were driven or how, where they received their guidance or how they received it. But I could see them doing things that were disruptive and that were not necessarily following the direction that the MPO had been following, but were more of a new way of doing things. And I think the first example of that is there were some issues that took place in the early 70s, late 60s that caused a chapter from Toronto to be expelled from the MPO, the Lubin Dimitrov chapter. And this came, you know, indirectly, directly from Ivan Mikhailov. What was driving that? I do not know. What I do know is there was a lot of speculation. And the speculation, it's not even worth mentioning. But what was happening, though, is it was creating division, a divide, and people were picking sides. And looking back on it, I think that plays right into what the Titoists were trying to accomplish by destroying, wanted to see the MPO gone because the MPO was not supporting what they were doing. So no MPO is good for them. I have zero knowledge or information if there was direct involvement, but looking back on it, it was like, there were there was this, and this is an anecdote, but there was this fella, this guy who was considerably older than us. He would come to conventions and he would dance and he would hang around with all the young kids. He would hang around with us. And he was kind of a chubby guy and he had a white beard. And everybody called this guy Dedon Baras.
Da.
Nobody knew anything about him. All of a sudden, somebody goes, "Be careful what you say to that guy. Be careful what you do in front of that guy. He's a spy. He's a Yugoslav spy." We didn't know this, but somebody suggested that might be the case. And the only reason I mention it is those are the kind of thoughts people had. They were assumptions, they were guesses, but it also, looking back on it, I'm thinking, okay, if the kids are thinking this, and by the kids, I mean those in our teens and early 20s, what are the adults experiencing? What are the leaders thinking? Do they think that there is a certain element that was put there that was, that is receiving directions from Belgrade? I mean, who knows? This is stuff out of a James Bond novel, for crying out loud. But is it a possibility? Don't know. I don't have any direct knowledge, but I do know that's what people were talking about. And if people were talking about it, somebody was coming up with it as an idea, and somebody wanted them to talk about it. Somebody wanted it to cause disruption, and it did. It did. Zero facts here. I have no facts, but these eyes, they saw some things. These ears heard some things. So who knows? What
Yeah,
is the saying? If it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. I don't know. I have no idea.
It's important that you share with us your personal experience, personal observations, and impressions. No precise knowledge needed. Of course, we can't prove anything.
Right.
We don't have, even if there is something which is probable, we can't open the
We
files of
don't
the
know.
secret services. We can't
That's right.
prove. But it's important to know the feeling about this. And also, it's important that you make it from a retrospective approach. Now you are able to recognize some trends.
Right.
Now you are able to recognize that behind one phrase or one move, there might be other intentions, other hidden plan. Actually, this is how usually things happen,
That's right.
not on the surface. So we remain on the level of speculations, but I do believe that in your experience as a person who really grew up, lived its life in the MPO, you have something here that you discover. Even maybe we'll never know how exactly
That's right.
things happen, but the development, the evolution of the organization uh, could be analyzed from this perspective.
It's very possible. That's right.
And I wouldn't like to take much of your time, but would you be okay for you to answer one last question for today?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. This is great.
And again, from a retrospective, looking retrospectively to the back to the past, what do you think MPO was able to accomplish in its existence that you witnessed, and what was not able to accomplish, let's say in the last 70 years, or especially in the field of human rights, freedoms, especially when we speak about the different areas of Macedonia after the Second World War.
I think for me, it well, first of all, I'm going to answer the question in reverse. It if I understand you right, the second part of your question, you're asking what I think the MPO could have done. It is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, it was what was able to accomplish, what could accomplish,
Right.
but was not able to for
And
different reason.
I think I'm going to start with that because that's kind of where we are now. And I really wish some things could have been done to embrace my generation sooner and more completely. For example, they referred to us as the Dechki. I was 25 years old when I heard somebody call me one of the Dechki. How old
Yeah.
was Gotza Delchev? How old was Damyan Gruyev? Did Gotza Delchev, did he live to his 30s? I don't think if he did, he wasn't far in his 30s.
Yeah,
They
he was
were all
31,
Dechki,
right?
right?
Yes. Yeah,
They
he
were
wasn't.
Dechki. So they were pushing us away. They weren't bringing us in like they really could have. Had they done that, had they done a few other things, incorporated a little more English in the Tribune, a little more English in the proceedings, and a little more openness, I think MPO would be bigger and hopefully stronger now. We'd still be here, but I think we could be bigger and stronger. Hindsight, like I said, is always 2020. You can't do it over. I think MPO's done a great job, with I think MPO's done a great job with what it has to work with now. And I'm really proud to be part of it. But circling back though, what MPO has done is, at least from my perspective, when I walk into a convention and I see the red and black flag, I see the MPO seal with the white tower
Yes.
and with the MPO around it. And I go into the room, the sales room, where all the pictures are. And I'm like, I look at this, I look at that. When my kids were young, I did it with my grandkids. I show them the pictures. Here's your dedo cordo. Here's your babalena. There's your babanada. There's your dedo Phil. You know, this was a convention in Detroit. This was a convention in Toronto. Do you see those guys there? Look at them all. They're smiling. You see that picture over there? They're all dead. You know, you see this man here. Do you see that there? Do you see these 5 children? MPO has managed to maintain access to our history. For me, when we had the convention in Fort Wayne, it was the first one after COVID. The Sunday afternoon, I spent a lot of time up in the Tribune, going through old tribunes and pictures and archives. And it just, you know, I'm like, this is all here. This is still here. This is a wealth of information. And so what I would like to see, and we're starting to see more and more of this, you know, we had it last year at the convention, you know, Professor Dienef and, I can't remember the name, but the gentleman from Chicago, they put on a lecture about Todor Alexandrov and his connection with the MPO.
Yeah, I think it was Vasilin Vasevsky.
Yeah, and I apologize for not remembering his name. That was fascinating. We need to do more of that. We need to do as much of that as we can so that, you know, my grandson, who's 2.5 years old, will be able to tell these stories 70 years from now, and he's 70 years old. That's why I'm doing this, to preserve this history. And the MPO has done a pretty good job of maintaining it. But that's where I think our strength is, in our history, and to just keep it alive, because it's so important. Everybody in the United States and Canada, with the exception of the Native Americans, came here for a better life, or because they got kicked out of wherever they were. Exactly. They were not wanted where they were. Things were not good for them where they were. So they came here and they started from scratch. Those people came here, like I said, very, very long time ago, about an hour and 40 minutes ago. My Baba Donna knew so little English, and she lived in this country for, 60 years. And those guys, my dad, they were in their teens. They were teenagers when they came here. Yes. My wife's father was 16 years old when he left Gavato and came to Columbus to be with his father. What did he know from America? I mean, they came here with so little knowledge, so little experience, virtually no money, no support. Maybe they knew a family, and they started a life, and they made something out of it. But they did not, and this is so important, and it's very important to me. They did not forget who they were, where they came from, and how they got here. And if I can keep that going, then I consider my mission accomplished. If my children were sitting here right next to me and they had a comment, they may or may not agree with me. We'll find out. But it's going to be their turn soon.
Yes, and that will be their generation.
That's right.
So I know my last question was like, whether the glass is half full or half empty. But the thing when we speak about MPO is how to fill the 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 glass up to the top.
That makes
But
sense. That makes
yes,
good sense. That's a good way to put it.
yeah, Mr. Chachoff, it was my pleasure and honor that you accepted our invitation of Corridor 8 podcast to start this series, Alive in the MPO. A
Thank
lot of
you.
a lot
I
of
am so excited about this. Thank you for being a participant in this project for me. It, you know, if everything goes well, what's the expression? Su Gospod napred.
so
In May, I'll get my diploma and I'll be able to say, okay, I did this, and you're helping me with it. So thank you very much.
it's my pleasure. So it was the first of the series of conversations with Mr. Greg Chachoff, the president of MPO Chapter Freedom in Columbus, Ohio. We will have few more next conversations. Stay with us in future.